for the panel discussion, we're going to open it up to you guys to ask any questions, that have been on your mind about Laravel 3, Laravel 4, anything. Dale, who's, he wrote Code Happy, and he's writing Code Right. It's been really involved in the community, makes the documentation templates, stuff like that. Sean is also a big community helper, tutorials. He hosts the Laravel forums for us, and Laravel ins and outs, Laravel.io. He's also written Laravel Starter, another book from Pat Publishing. So, yeah, just fire away, anything.
How come 4 isn't 5.4 and up? So you can use shortened array syntax and traits.
The main reason, the question was, why isn't Laravel 4 PHP 5.4 only? And that was mainly because I thought that most PHP 5.4 features were kind of optional in the sense that, like for instance, PHP 5.3 introduced closures, which are used in the routing. So Laravel wouldn't even be possible without Laravel or PHP 5.3. But with PHP 5.4, I didn't really think there was anything like really holding me back in the sense like there's nothing in 5.4 I needed to make Laravel 4. Like I could do some cool stuff with traits maybe, like in Eloquent, but there's nothing just like killer that like made or break it. So of course you can use 5.4 in your own app. But, yeah. So and I kind of feel the same way about 5.5 honestly.
It'd be cool to have like a show of hands to see who's using 5.3 and who's using 5.4 and maybe that lines the
5.2
for you. So 5.3, hands up. Yeah, everyone's you're stuck to that because of your company. So imagine who can use 5.4 without worrying about it, who's got the hosting for it. Yeah. We need to be able to keep everyone happy.
In the back room?
Yep, hand in hand with that question, a lot of servers stop at 5.3.6. So we talked about a distributed app in Laravel 4, which requires 5.3.7. Why is it that it requires 5.3.7? Where is that, if you don't mind?
That's only in one place actually. In the PHP versions before 5.3.7 had a security vulnerability in their crypt function. So like decrypt hashes and 5.3.0 to 5.3.6 are not as secure as they could be. I don't think they're totally broken, but they're not totally right. And that was fixed in 5.3.7. But you can run Laravel 4, just don't use the built-in, or you won't be able to use the built-in hash method. You'll need to use your own like password hashing. But you can use the rest of the framework. I don't think there's any other problem. And the composer dependency is actually set to 5.3.0 to let you go ahead and install it, even though the documentation says 5.3.7. So I probably can note that in the documentation. That's the only thing. Ben?
Yeah, I was just to sort of note on that. You can, there is a patch you can install instead, which will let you run that 5.5 hashing package on less than 5.3.7 by the same issue without hashing. You can't get around it.
Any other questions?
A while ago, I remember reading on the forums, I don't know if this ever got answered, but the forums themselves were going to be rebuilt using Laravel? Or has that never been the case?
No, I don't think we're going to actually rewrite form software.
Yeah, that's why I was confused. I thought the developer posted
No,
it.
we are working on like an entire new system for Laravel.io, and it should be kind of ready around the same time that Laravel 4 is about ready to come out. But yeah, I actually have like a question for everybody here. Is there anything that you've been specifically missing in like the Laravel experience and in learning and using the system, something that the community could be more focused on, like resolving? Does anybody have any specific pain points? It's that easy?
The screencasts are really helpful, but I know it takes time.
Yeah, more screencasts. Those screencasts are great.
This is a question for Sean. Sean, what's it like to work
we're probably one of the most talented web designers. Can you just kind of talk about that with me?
I guess once you pass the ego, it's all right.
One issue I had in Laravel 3 was oftentimes I'm developing just for an API, and a lot of the the error response will be all HTMLized with JavaScript and stuff. Is there anything in Laravel 4 to handle just like doing work without outside of a browser?
Yeah, in Laravel 4, I think I mentioned this in one screencast, but there's an app error method. You pass a closure to it. I should have brought my laptop up here actually. You pass a closure to it and you type hint. Just type hint in the base exception class to catch everything, and you can return a response from that, kind of like a filter. So you could format it like into JSON or something like that, and you would override all HTML errors at that point. It would be strictly JSON. So yeah, you can. It's a lot easier in Laravel 4. Ian?
So one thing I think people might be interested in is when you build actual applications like you processes, if there's any tips, tricks, hints, things you use Laravel in interesting ways, or how you can architect your own applications on Laravel 4, but in terms of actual application development.
Yeah, how many people have used Laravel 4? Okay, so quite a few. So is everyone familiar with service providers at all? Service providers are just like a class to bootstrap or various things in your application. One tip I would have for Laravel 4 would be to make your own service providers for your own app, even if it's not going to be a package. Like use them as organizational tools, and like feel free to make 3 or 4 of them for your own app. So like, for instance, we're building Snappy, so I might create like a Snappy auth service provider, or like just a Snappy service provider, and use that to organize all my like bootstrap code. So that's one tip. Another tip, which this needs to be the default in Composer, but when you do Composer dump autoload, always do the optimize option on that, -- optimize, because that's like a 35% speed boost on Laravel 4. And I don't know why that's optional, but it seems like that would be the default fast. But.
So when you're creating the service provider for like your auth, what kind of things are you bootstrapping?
So in that, I would put any like IOC bindings, any like my app bind calls, app shared calls, and any setting up any dependency injection stuff. Also registering any events, because there's kind of like registering events. It's always for me like, where would you put that? Like you put them all in your start file. You put them in you don't really want to put them in your routes file. So like, I would have like a Snappy event service provider that like registers events, or like just organizes that in some way, kind of to cleanly separate all my bootstrap stuff. That's what I use it for. Here.
So I guess a very common question, but so our company is starting a new project too, where we're using Laravel. Should we use Laravel 3, or is it recommended to already start with Laravel 4 now, even though it's not stable yet? Is it, does it make sense, I guess?
We're converting to Laravel 4. I just started converting our app to Laravel 4 3 or 4 days ago. So I think at this point it is fairly stable. One of the things that will change on Laravel 4 is I want to kind of like polish out some of the rough edges on the workbench stuff, but that's not really central to the framework, so to speak. So most of the core stuff is ready to go, and the documentation is pretty decent. So at this point, I would say it's not that dangerous to start working on it. It's going to make your life easier when it is released soon. So
Exactly, yeah.
Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the things that is cool to still touch on is that just because Laravel 4 comes out doesn't mean you have to go and convert everything. You can still use Laravel 3 and it's still as good as it ever was.
Yeah. Laravel 3 is still really good. So I always tell people don't feel pressure to upgrade your app just because 4's out. If it's working, a lot of times there's no need just to rewrite it for the fun of it. So.
Yeah, and simultaneously the upgrade path from 3 to 4, if you are continuing to use systems, like you have the static classes of 3, upgrading to 4 is going to be pretty straightforward. You can continue using the facades, and the interface is very similar. And then if you'd like to, once you have it running, you can refactor it to take advantage of different features.
Yeah, and one of the nice things about Laravel that I did on purpose was a lot of the method names are just one word. So like the transition to snake case to camel case, a lot of times just doesn't even matter because all the methods are like auth attempt, input get, you know, they're all one word, so it's just they're kind of a non-issue for us a lot of times. And so the conversion has been really easy for the most part. So.
Did I see where you posted on Twitter? We're starting to work in Laravel 4, where you're working on forms.
Yeah, I'm working on forms. I have a branch locally that I'm working on forms right now.
Okay.
It's pretty far along. I'd say it's like 60 or 70% done. It's similar to what we have now. I mean, there's nothing. There are a few things to do with Eloquent to make building forms for Eloquent models easier, but all the other basic stuff like form text, all that stuff is the same. So.
For Dale and Sean, I know you both wrote some books on the subject of 3. Any idea when 4, obviously it's going to come out and you're going to write your book, what kind of timeline we can expect before it's released?
For me, for me, it's on the way at present. I'm a good deal into it, but Laravel 4 was bigger and better. I want Code Bright, which will be the sequel to Code Happy. I want that to be bigger and better as well. So I'm not going to rush it, but I'm going to answer that question in my talk tomorrow, hopefully. But there'll be new stuff. So I'm off. Yeah, you'll find out tomorrow. There's good things coming my way.
Yeah, and for me, I ended up writing a kind of a getting started guide for Laravel 3. But I want my next book to be something that's kind of fills some niches that aren't commonly filled by technical books. So I want to talk more about how to approach the architecture of the application from the very beginning of the process. And so that's going to involve me using Laravel 4 in production, quite a bit, and then from there I'll continue to write and then release something early next year probably.
I have a question. So obviously, one thing I don't think has been directly addressed is that Laravel 3 was just released, I guess, in last spring, March or something like that. So obviously we're just into the new year, and maybe you guys, especially Taylor, obviously can give some thoughts as to what your thinking was in terms of doing this pretty large redesign and some of the things, the improvement that brings, and just your general mindset and taking that project on.
Yeah, so Phil kind of laid out a foundation for this where CodeIgniter is like the grandfather of like Kohana, Fuel, Laravel 3. Like the architecture is really the same, or very similar in all those layers. But the problem is, like Fuel, Kohana, and Laravel 3 were static heavy. So like a lot of static methods, which is really convenient syntax-wise, but in terms of testability, it just like kills it because as soon as a class references another static class, like you have no way to test it at all. So, and it wasn't like I was totally ignorant of that. I was aware of that, but I didn't really have a good solution at the time for how to solve that. So I knew Laravel 3 was kind of a fudge architecturally, like on purpose, and just, I just didn't have a good solution at the time. But around last year I started coming up with the idea for facades where we could basically, when you call input get, it resolves the input class out of the IOC container and then calls the get method for you kind of behind the scenes. So you can almost use the static syntax, but still benefit from the testability like Jeffrey showed earlier. He was using kind of static syntax but still mocking it. And that was really the driving force between for Laravel 4 was how can I make a version of Laravel with the same like syntax that everybody likes, but address all the testability concerns that we had with static methods. So facades and the IOC container was really at the foundation of that and drove everything. And I think it's turned out pretty well. Even though it's pretty technical under the hood, but on the surface for most developers it looks really the exact same. And if you're not interested, you don't ever really have to care about what's going on with the IOC container and any of that. So it's a lot more architecturally pure while at the same time having the convenient syntax. Because I think Symfony is like architecturally pure, but the syntax reflects the architecture in the sense that's like very verbose. The dependency injection is like super obvious, and it's just a little more hard to work with, so.
Are there any like negatives you see to using facades in that way?
One potential pitfall of using facades in your own classes would be you can just use like 20 facades in a class, and you're not even thinking about that class's responsibilities, so to speak. So you're not like delegating the responsibilities of a class like you should and keeping it small, because you're just throwing facades everywhere. So whereas if you're injecting them, you kind of see your constructor getting longer. So it's kind of telling you like, hey, this class is doing a lot of stuff because your constructor needs like 20 things. So it's a lot more obvious to you as the developer that this class is doing more than it should. Whereas with facades, you may not know it, like it's not as obvious because your constructor is not big, but yet you're using like 10 facades. So, you know, as a developer, you can use the constructor as kind of like a gauge of the class's responsibility. And if I see a constructor personally, if it gets like to 4 or 5, I start thinking like it's getting kind of borderline. And then when I get to 6, definitely I would be like, this is doing way too much. Like, this needs to be 2 classes or 3. So.
Can you expand a little bit on that in terms of when we should be using the facades and when we should be injecting a dependency in a constructor?
Yeah, okay. This might be a little technical, but for me, what I try to do is I have my routes. Like think of routes as the web API to your application, okay, or controllers or your web API, either one. And your app doesn't really care about HTTP or the web or anything like that. You know what I mean? Your app is dealing with a database, and it might be manipulating the state of the database or your backend store. But your app doesn't really have to care about cookies and sessions or whatever. That's at more like the route controller level. So what I try to do is write all my like repositories or business classes that do all my logic totally separate from Laravel or the web in general even. And just let them do all the business logic, and then have the routes do like my facade cookie work, like cookie set or input get, and then pass the input in, like as an array. Don't use the input class in my logic classes, because then I kind of separated my app from the web and even from Laravel itself, which is kind of nice for testability, and I don't have to worry about dependencies in terms of session and all that. So that's what I try to do. And if you look at the documentation, I think there's kind of an example of that with the repositories and stuff like that. So I kind of, to answer your question shortly, I mainly use the facades like in the routes.
Okay,
and then I would pass stuff in to other classes. Anything else? These are pretty hard questions. Okay, back in the back.
Earlier you mentioned that every coder has someone that they look up to. So I was wondering if you guys wanted to name drop some people.
I know who you're going to say.
Yeah, you should watch Uncle Bob's screencast. CleanRunners.com. It's like 16 episodes. It's better than like a college degree sometimes.
Yeah. I wanted to say Uncle Bob as well, but I should probably say that like working on Sun Taylor and some of this stuff, and he's like come and shown me like new things, and he's got a way of solving problems and approaching problems that's really handy. So go and look over the source to the project, and you'll learn a lot from what he's written. So take a look at that.
I like Uncle Bob. He's kind of grumpy to me, but I like him. Okay. He's really good for like a technical foundation level. I like DHH from Rails for like his pragmatism. Like he kind of cuts through. He just has a good way of cutting through a lot of like high stuff and bringing it down to like what really matters. I think Fabian from Symfony is really good from just like his pure like code output. I mean, maintaining like SwiftMailer, Twig, he's pretty hardcore. He's done a lot of work that's helped Laravel, even though the style is a little verbose. So. Yeah, I think those are the main guys.
I mentioned like why he's not a programmer, and he says, why don't you guys have video on the documentation? I was like, you guys have any chance to put some of the screencasts on the docs itself?
Yeah. Sean, I think what we're trying to do is keep the Laravel website mainly just documentation, and then the reason I gave the forums to Sean was to kind of try to help make that kind of the community-driven tutorials, screencasts, and Sean might be able to elaborate on that. I know they have plans for some cool search stuff.
We can't really finish it.
Yeah, as the code changes, making these screencasts is unreasonable, so it's not something like, you look up any Laravel screencast and if, you know, the API has changed since, you have to kind of make people aware of that when they're looking for videos or tutorials. It's just standard stuff. You know, you search for something in PHP and you'll find code from 2005 or something, and somebody doesn't think that they should look at timestamps on all the blog posts and everything. But Laravel.io, we have some really great ideas, I think, about how to change the way that the community can like interact and put their efforts into like a knowledge base that can be indexed and searched for through by everybody. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really cool project. We just got to finish it up.
Yeah, like one thing Sean told me, and I hope this is still correct, but one thing they've talked about is having like a search, not only the docs, but like tutorials, screencasts will be like a global search of Laravel knowledge, so that'd be pretty cool. Anything else? Aaron?
Yeah, are there any plans currently to document each of the Illuminate components?
That's kind of low on my priority list right now, just because like I'm kind of trying to cater to the Laravel family first in a sense, and as I have time, I'll kind of go back and do that after Laravel 4 is out. But I'm kind of trying to cater to the framework as a whole first, because that's what I really care about the most is Laravel as a whole. So.
I'm curious, how is your time divided at user state between building Laravel and then building Snappy?
When I first started Userscape, Ian gave me, I think, a couple months to work on Laravel 3, and we needed, like bundles, migrations, we needed those features for what we were building, so it all kind of went hand in hand. But after that main initial sprint, I've had a few weeks here and there where I worked on Laravel stuff, but it mainly transitioned, to all Userscape work and back to just kind of working on Laravel at night. But he's been gracious enough to give me recently a couple weeks and time to work on slides and code. And, yeah, but for the most part, I work on Userscape during the day.
Taylor, so is there anything else like, I know you mentioned workspaces, but like what are you working on to get version 4 out to move?
I have the workbench improvements, form helpers, and then it will just be kind of combing through the issues that are already on GitHub. But yeah, no other big like revolutionary components or anything.
So no console.
No.
Okay.
So yeah, nothing huge. So it's pretty close.
Why should somebody care about that when they use it?
I don't know what else you would use at this point, honestly. Yeah, I guess you could use Code is still good. It has a lot of community support, but it's kind of getting older. Kohana's the documentation's hard to learn. Fuel's kind of slowed down, and I know a couple guys are still working on Fuel, so that'd be an alternative you might look into. I think you should use Laravel because it kind of combines the accessibility of CodeIgniter with the kind of enterprisey flexibility, testability of Symfony.
And we have an IRC channel of like 240 people strong every night, so a lot of people who've been making apps for a long time who can answer questions.
Yeah, but it seems to be, along with Symfony, kind of the fastest moving framework and the most people that are trying to innovate seem to be involved with it also.
It seems like the Laravel community is all, not just the code, or not just the community, but the code is even about people. And I think that's, Jonathan, right? I think that's like a really good reason for people to be interested in it, or to have a desire to look at it. Because it's not just about, I think a couple of people have mentioned, not about kind of the inflated egos in the community, but people who want to help people learn. So it's a really approachable code base, but it's really powerful at the same time. I mean, the IRC popping all the time, that's all people. And so it's just really cool to see this kind of spring up almost overnight, in a way. And it's just centered around people doing things together.
Yeah, and to kind of bounce off that, my Laravel development has always been like people focused or developer centric in the sense that when I start a new component, all I do is like open Notepad or just open a blank document and I start writing like, how do I want people to use this? Like, how do I want this to look from the outside? Like, I never start on the inside, on like the technical details. It's almost like building, you know, the interface to an app. Like, how do I want this to look and feel, and like, how should it come across, you know, from the developer standpoint. So it's always very people-centric and it's going to be easy to use and consume. And like, I'll write the perfect, like, how do I want this, what's my dream API for this component? And I don't even think about, is this even possible? But I just write it like at the dream and then just kind of start there from the technical way of implementing it. So.
Additionally, like when you start to use Laravel, it's really easy and straightforward, but like you were saying earlier, there's a really high ceiling. So you can, as you develop, you know, a lot of newer developers can jump in and start using it, but as they grow, then they can start to implement more patterns and utilize different features. And so there's a sort of like future to not only, you know, the quality of the code, the architecture, but also you have a chance to stay motivated for a long time and really, you know, improve your craft without having to be frustrated with the lack of flexibility in the system or, you know, just anything like that. So you have a lot of room to grow.
I think we're quite friendly to beginners as well. And beginners are going to be the people writing tutorials in the future or writing new code that all of us could potentially be using. So I think that's kind of important. I think that's a reason to be using it.
Yeah, we were just talking about the other night that the beginners are like always the most enthusiastic in the sense that they're tweeting, like Laravel's so awesome, you know, they're like the biggest evangelists for the framework. So being accessible is huge for us, you know, as a framework. Back to you.
For all three of you, tabs versus spaces.
When I first started writing Laravel, I used Sublime Text and I just used whatever was default out of the box. So whatever that is, that's what Laravel is. I'm not even really sure. I think it's tabs.
It's tabs.
Okay, yeah. So whatever Sublime Text was.
I want everything else to start using tabs better. Basically, because that's the problem. Like, you have alignment issues if you use tabs on certain apps. Like, even GitHub, like preview, code preview, that will mess up sometimes. You'll see a line in a weird place and stuff like that. But we're stuck with spaces for now. I think what feels like it's right.
I don't really think the shape of your code is like a subjective thing. You know, there's like it's objectively better to have shorter lines than like longer lines unless you're doing something crazy. In every situation, you can kind of determine what are the pros and cons. And I kind of feel like spaces eliminate some of the variables, but you know, you still say, you know, we have easy to see indentation, and some languages are more like verbose than others. In PHP, you know, you might have longer functions than you might have in like a C# or something. So 4 spaces is like what I like with PHP.
Jeff again?
I just posted, if you have a question for me, let me know on NetText. And a lot of people keep asking, where can they get a Laravel shirt?
I don't even have very many Laravel shirts.
We've got Cafe Press up somewhere. They're not amazing. But
well, we did that. We did one run of Laravel shirts, I know, and I guess we just, you know, we sold out of those, but maybe we can do another run sometime.
Yeah, you should all pass the A in at the bottom. I think that's why he said you should do
Get Laravel 4 out first and then make the t-shirts.
We've got some nice Pyro CMS
Just
stuff.
Question, how much time do you spend on naming things? Everything's got really good names.
That's a specialty.
Yeah, honestly, that comes pretty quick. I don't know. It's just, let's just be in that. But yeah, naming stuff, I kind of like to do it. Honestly, it's fun. So there's some good ones in there.
Yeah, it's pretty embarrassing. I like push a pull request in there. I think I'm like doing a great job. But it's like, I'll just rename this, and I feel terrible.
I think just kind of extending what Sean said about the ceiling and how the framework really allows developers to sort of build on themselves. That's something that's actually like a real thing that I think any of us that have been a long time in the community really see like almost day to day. You know, I can name like a dozen people who, you know, 6 months ago I saw them in the IRC asking the most new questions ever. And now they're the ones who are, you know, I'm even asking them questions because they've learned that much that quickly, right, about, you know, just everything in the whole framework. So I think it really speaks to how well it's built, the architecture, you know, community and everything. It all comes together, I think, fairly uniquely. I've been involved in a lot of online communities over the years, and never have I come across one quite like Laravel is. It's quite
Yeah, we're really proud of the community that we've built, and
There's like a lot of energy.
yeah, the challenge will be keeping it this way. We're likely to grow, and I hope we will. That's up to you guys.
Do any of you have any advice for more legacy PHP applications, more procedural, will be ported into Laravel 4?
You re-envision your app and write it in Laravel 4.
I think you just have to identify components, you know what I mean? Like to me, whenever I code, it's always like all about layers and responsibilities and trying to group related things. So if you can take your procedural code and take those, group these related things, try to find classes out of it, then you know you might be able to make some headway that way. And once you have that library of classes, you could, you know, inject them into your controllers or do whatever. But yeah, I would just start looking for related pieces of code, trying to group those together.
I'd say don't get lost trying to find the perfect solution. Just find a solution and work on it.
Why did you remove light bulb on the source code?
Is that gone? It's not there? Okay.
Probably repeat it for the folks.
Yeah, there used to be a line of code in Laravel 4 called light bulb on that started the framework. That was because when I first started writing Laravel 4, I wrote it under the Illuminate repository. And that was to distinguish the separate components from the framework as a whole, and also so that people didn't notice I was working on Laravel 4 for like several months and never asked me anything about it, never, there's no question. So it was like peace, you know, to like work on it without, because when people start seeing that new Laravel 4 code that's not finished, like they get super scared, like where's this, where's that, where's this. And I just needed time to get it to a point to where it looks familiar. But I think I was probably just to kind of get the Illuminate branding out of Laravel 4 probably, since Lightbulb on didn't really make sense to Laravel people. So.
This kind of goes along with that. It seems like every time you pop into an IRC room, there's 15 people that instantly message you. How do you deal with all of that amount of traffic to you instead of getting work done?
Yeah, in the early days, I was able to answer like a lot more questions personally, responded to a lot of emails personally, but as it's gone on, I try to direct people to the forums mainly if they have a question. And I still answer questions like over private IRC stuff occasionally if they're short. If they require explanation, like I'll just have to say, you know, post in the forums or whatever. Yeah, that's getting more and more difficult. So I started like using like my Nix, you know, bar work in IRC. That's kind of cut down. I think people are taking the hint that I'm not always available, but I still like to help people personally when I have the chance.
I've noticed it even in the Fuel PHP room. When you pop in, somebody will ask you about Laravel inside Fuel PHP.
Yeah, I try not to do that. I try not to let them do that too much to not steal their channel. But take maybe one or two more.
Yeah, Taylor. So in your talk earlier, you kind of talked about your vision going into Laravel. Do you have any type of vision or specific goals for the future as it relates to the framework and community?
Yeah, that's kind of my whole second talk tomorrow.
Okay.
Will be like the first talk was to get us to kind of today, and then for the second talk will go from here on out. You know, what are we looking at for like the next couple of years, where we want to go and stuff. So, we have one more question.
Yeah, I have limited exposure to Laravel 4 thus far. I'm a little confused about the relationship between bundles and the composer packages. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, so there's going to be two main differences. One is bundles we distribute through our own like console utility and backend. So the one difference there is we switch to Composer for distribution. And in the actual bundle code probably one of the main differences is going to be instead of a bundle start file, you know, you have a start.php in your bundle, you'll just have like a service provider class, which will do like almost the exact same thing as your start file did. It's kind of it's analogous to start files in Laravel 3. So those are your two main differences. The rest of your code can be fairly similar. But a lot of bundles were just wrapping things that were already on Composer. Like we had a Swift mailer bundle, which is not really necessary. We had like, you know, markdown bundles, which are already on Composer. So a lot of bundles kind of got eliminated with the move to Composer because there was already stuff out there. And the big ones that aren't, like Sentry and stuff like that, have been ported to Laravel 4. Facet, the asset thing has been ported to Laravel 4. So, okay, so nice panel discussion. Next, we're going to have the cocktail hour downstairs. I'll let Ian kind of give the
Yeah, so
on that.
I just wanted to say thanks to all the sponsors for